So this is the 10 introductory lecture. We'll call this Introduction to the Academic Community. All right? As first-year college students, it makes sense, at least to me, that you would ask a really simple question. That question is, what am I doing here, and where is here? I'll answer the second question first. Here is what we call the academic community. What you're doing here, well, that one's going to take a little bit of time for us. So let's kind of chat through it, all right? So let's spend now a few minutes kind of talking about school post-high school, all right? For as long as I've been doing this class for the college, and it's what now going on plus 20 some odd years, I felt obligated to share this information with students, because typically what happens is that students graduate from high school and then begin the process of their university or college instruction because that's what they're supposed to do. I mean, that's what everybody told them they were supposed to do, so dude, I'm going to college, right? But the question becomes real quickly, what does that even mean to go to school, to go to college at the next level, and why would anybody do it in the first place? And so we're going to try and kind of get a general overview of what it means to get involved in what I will call the academic community. And then we're going to finish our conversation by asking, how does one succeed within the academic community? And that question will involve some certain skill sets that we'll talk about. No big shock. The idea behind a 10-10 class is that it's one of the first classes that you take as you enter the university, the academic community, so that you can begin to develop some of the necessary skill sets for success. Let's talk through it, okay? Let's begin first of all by talking about post-high school, all right? After 4 years of high school, the understanding for most students is that they've got a choice to make. They either immediately jump into the workforce and go to work, okay, full-time, or they begin the process of more education. Of course, you're sitting here, which means you at least have chosen more education, right? But what kind of options are involved here? I mean, like, how many different choices do I have? Well, there's a number of them. Let's kind of list them. By the way, one of the reasons why often students won't go directly into the workforce and rather begin some kind of university, academic community training is money, right? In other words, they recognize they can go right now and get a job in the workforce, but the likelihood of getting good raises and that kind of thing is often tied directly to education. My favorite story of this is that student of mine who didn't want to go to school, was a great welder, went right into the oil field, started working, but 5 years later when I saw him and I asked him, he said, dude, I'm still getting paid the same thing they started me out at, and they keep saying to me, we'd give you a raise if you had an education. Go back to college and get an education. He's like, oh, well, I got married and had one kid. It's not like I have time and money to be able to go away to college. See, so a lot of students will make the decision to go into the university as opposed to going straight into the workforce simply because they want to try and make more money on the back end. But what are these options? Well, let's start. One option, right, is to do what we will call often the junior college experience, right? Or sometimes referred to as the 2-year experience, all right? Now, in this kind of an experience, you're going to go to 2 years. The reason, by the way, it for many years was called a junior college was because when you finish the 2 years, the theory was, you have what's called junior standing. That is to say, you finished your freshman, your sophomore years, and so then you graduate from a 2-year institution with junior standing. That's why it used to be called junior college. We often don't hear that term anymore. The reason is because often, once you finish 2 years of a 2-year program, you may not have junior standing when you transfer. That depends on where you're transferring to, it depends on the program, it depends on the scores that you received in the 2 years of the original program. When you finish from a 2-year program, and obviously Northwest Community College is an example of a 2-year program, right? We have a number of them in the state of Wyoming, don't we, right? Okay, you could have taken any number of options. You chose to kind of work different schools. Maybe you're taking this class here, but then you're going to go to a different school and it'll be a 2-year program maybe. For all of them, when you graduate, you will graduate with what's called an Associate of Arts or an Associate of Science degree, all right? An AA or an AS, and that's simply, or an AS, that's correct. So in other words, this little A signifies that it's a 2-year program. And this makes sense that we kind of start to learn the nomenclature or the code language within the academic community. So for example, you meet someone and she says, I'm working on my AA. You know that that's a 2-year degree program, okay? Some students immediately elect to not go into a 2-year program, but rather to go to what's called a liberal arts 4-year college. Okay? Liberal arts 4-year college. Now, what is this? Well, right away, obviously, we're talking about a 4-year program versus a 2-year program, but again, we don't want to say that necessarily it's a 4-year program. There are a lot of programs that often, if you don't study during the summer, you're going to end up taking an additional semester or 2 semesters, which turn a 4-year program into a 5-year program. Okay? Now, these liberal art colleges, 4-year programs, when you graduate from them, you're going to have a Bachelor of Art or a Bachelor of Science, a BA or a BS. And of course, much has been made of the fact that, yes, it's called BS, and, you know, the jokes are fairly self-evident. Now, one of the interesting things about a liberal arts 4-year college is that these often are some of the more expensive institutions in America. For example, one of our great liberal arts colleges in the cornfields of Iowa, a school named Grinnell. Unbelievably expensive. It's a fairly expensive school. I mean, if you have to pay outright, right, to go to the school. Obviously, there's lots of money, scholarships, and the like that are given. But these schools can be extremely expensive. One of the obvious questions is, why would a parent send his or her daughter to a school that costs sometimes as much as $50,000 a year, when that same student could go, for example, for virtually nothing to the state university? Well, let's list that one as our third option, and this, of course, is the 4-year university. Okay, the 4-year university. Now notice the difference in my language. I use the term college versus the term university, right? Okay. Now the 4-year universities, everything from the state university, the University of Wyoming, to, for example, a 4-year university like Harvard or Stanford. Okay. Again, the degrees are the same, a BA or a BS degree. So this becomes a really intriguing question. And it's one of those kind of questions that I love to ask. What really is the difference between going to the University of Wyoming or going to Stanford? Going to the University of Wyoming or going to Harvard, for example? Well, of course we can say that it's not as expensive for a student from the University, from Wyoming to go to the University of Wyoming. That's true. But in terms of education, what's the difference? What's the difference between those two schools? And why is it that Harvard has such a reputation that often the University of Wyoming does not? Now, it's interesting to me that most students who graduate from high school in Wyoming can't answer that question. They really don't know. They know that Harvard has a reputation. They're not exactly sure how did Harvard get that reputation. I mean, just because it's what in Cambridge, in Boston, that gives it the right to have a reputation? Well, no. Well, then what is the difference between the two schools? The difference between the two schools has a lot to do with the programs that are offered and, more particularly, some of the ways we understand the academic community itself. Now we're ready to begin to kind of talk a bit more about this 4-year university program. Because a 4-year university program offers not only Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Science, by the way, what we often will refer to as an undergraduate degree. undergraduate degree. Well, now what does that mean? Well, to understand what we mean by undergraduate, you have to know what we mean by graduate or graduate school. Well, what does that mean? Well, after a 4-year program, okay, you as a student can study beyond that 4-year program. Those studies beyond are what we call graduate degrees. Okay, graduate degrees, all right? Now these graduate degrees happen at the university level, okay? They are programs of kind of 2 types, all right? The first is going to be specific to disciplines within the university itself. You can start with a 2-year master's degree, okay? And the degree, if you get it, when you finish after 2 years, is what we call a Master of Arts or a Master of Science, MA or MS, okay? Now, what is it that this degree involves? Well, 2 things. One, you've got to do coursework, okay? And that means you've just got to continue to take classes just like you would have done when you were in your 4-year program as an undergraduate. If somebody uses the term, I'm working as an undergraduate at the University of Wyoming, that means they're working somewhere in their 4 or 5 years before they graduate with their Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Science. But you also, to get a master's degree in most programs, unless you are going to just do a program in coursework, you have to write a book of research called a thesis. Now later in this class, we'll talk about thesis writing, but we're using that term differently at that point. We're talking about a single sentence that kind of characterizes everything that's important about your essay. This term is different. This term is a book of research that you, the student, will engage in, okay? And normally that book ranges in length somewhere between 50 to 150 pages of research when it's all said and done, okay? And that gets you your master's degree, all right? You can keep going. After a master's degree, you can get a 4-year or longer PhD degree. Now this we call the doctorate degree, okay? The same gig, you're going to go to more schooling, and you're going to take coursework, just like the master's degree, and then you're also going to write another book, only this one we don't call a thesis. We call this a dissertation, okay? A dissertation. The dissertation, just like the thesis, is a book of research, usually running between 150 to 1,000 pages of research. Okay? Got me? When you are finished with your PhD, you then can be called Dr. So-and-so. Okay? You can be called a doctor. Now, don't confuse this with the doctor that you go to when you have a sore back. Okay, that's a different kind of doctor. We'll get to those kinds of degree programs at the university as well. Okay? The PhD then allows you to be able to teach to prof, that's to be a professor at the university. Okay? Now, question. How does one pay for these programs of the master's degree and the PhD degree? The primary answer to that is what's called the Teaching Assistantship Program, the TA program. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means the following. If you are, for example, working at the University of Wyoming to get a master's degree or a PhD in English, you oftentimes will be asked to teach classes at the freshman level of the undergraduate program. So in other words, you're doing 2 things if you're working on your PhD and you have a TA. You are doing your research to get ready to write either your book thesis or your book dissertation, but at the same time, you're also teaching undergraduate, freshman level, sometimes sophomore level classes. This very class is often taught at the University of Wyoming and many universities across America by teaching assistantship candidates who are working on their master's degree or their PhD. The one thing you want to make sure that you never do with one of those TA instructors is to call them Dr. Robinson, because you've insulted them. They're not a doctor yet. They don't have the PhD, and to call them Dr. Robinson, not such a good idea. On the other hand, if you are being lectured by a prof who has a PhD, you want to make sure you call that individual by Dr. So-and-so within the academic community. Now, some people say, well, why is this such a big dog deal? Well, it's part of its ego, right? But if you look at the board, it makes some sense. I mean, you do 4 years to get a bachelor's, sometimes 5, right? You do 2 years on top of that of your master's. We're now up to 7, sometimes even beyond that, right? Years, and then you got to go 4 or 5 more years. In other words, you've worked to get this degree about as long as most students start kindergarten and finish with, their senior year of high school, so you can get this degree. And so don't be surprised, as one of my students found out, when he called her Miss Wilson, and she immediately responded, "That is Dr. Wilson." And my student was like, "Geez, what crawled up her, butt?" Well, just kind of understand, all right, that this is just kind of part of the rules of the game that's being played within the academic community, okay? So, let me point out something real quickly. What is the difference between a Grinnell in Iowa, a liberal arts college and the tremendous cost involved there, and, for example, the University of Wyoming? And why would parents, because they're the ones who usually help pay for college education at the undergraduate level, why would parents spend so much more money sending their child to a school in Iowa when they could go virtually for nothing to the University of Wyoming? Why would that be the case? What makes that kind of schooling different from the University of Wyoming? And the answer is this TA program, more particularly this graduate degree. Are you ready for this? Liberal arts colleges have no graduate programs. What that means is all of the people who prof or teach at a liberal arts college, all of them will have a PhD. They're fully tenured profs. So in other words, when you're being taught at a Grinnell by 4-year PhD, by PhD profs, you are being taught by genuine professors within the field, and not individuals that are working to get their degree. Now, this is an interesting dynamic, because sometimes the best teachers on university campuses are actually TA candidates. Why? Because they're involved in the research, they're young, they're dynamic, they're often closer in age to the university student as the undergraduate student, and they can actually relate oftentimes much better. There is the flip side. Because they're there to write their master's thesis or their PhD dissertation, they sometimes might see students at the undergraduate level who they have to teach as kind of a royal pain in the rear. And they basically are keeping them from doing the kind of research that they would really like to be doing. And to that degree, sometimes the TA situation is not so healthy. It's interesting on a college visit to the University of Wyoming to just ask one of those people who are walking you around the school, how many full tenured profs will I see in my freshman year if I take classes outside of the honors program? And the answer will be not very many. In fact, virtually none. Okay? In other words, the PhDs who are working to get PhDs are usually going to be teaching the majority of the classes. And it's a sweet gig for the TA because they get paid to teach, and often they also get paid scholarship money so they don't have to pay as much for their graduate degree. Make sense? But we still haven't answered the other question. Why is it that the University of Wyoming is often not known as prestigious as, for example, Harvard? Because Harvard University and the University of Wyoming offer the same courses. The professors who teach in those two schools, they both went through this same process of credentialing, we call it, getting those degrees. The PhD is what we call the terminal degree. That means it's the last one in the list. Unless you want to go get a second PhD, you're pretty much done. When you're proffing in the English department, for example, once you have the PhD from the University of Chicago, you're done. You don't normally have to go out and get another PhD. You're done. That's why we call it the terminal degree. But both the University of Wyoming and Harvard have the same kind of credentialing process. All of the profs will have had the same kind of credentialing process. The question, obviously, is what's going on that makes Harvard considered so much more prestigious? Which, by the way, isn't completely always true. For many years, the University of Wyoming's Engineering College was considered one of the more elite in all of America. There were actually students who came to Laramie to study in the engineering program instead of going to Harvard as undergraduates. Really? Really, really? Why would they do that? Because they wanted to study specifically in a program. For example, the University of Wyoming is well known for its geology program, especially because of all the stuff that lays under the dirt in this state, right? We're familiar with those natural resources. To come and study in the state might put you closer to that kind of dynamic, might explain why. The reason why, though, is going to involve now a little story that I need to tell you, okay? And it will help you to kind of begin to understand a little bit of the dynamics in play here as we're talking about what's going on with this academic community, okay? Let's imagine it for a moment. Lockhart there is a prof at Stanford. Now, she's a fully tenured prof, okay? Oh, yeah. Stanford, the U.S. News and World Report, a magazine of news, every year goes through a serious number crunching process where they then will spit out what they call the top tier 1 universities in America, okay? Stanford is usually ranked in the top 5, as is Harvard and Yale and Princeton and the other schools, okay? So Lockhart there is proffing. She is working at Stanford, and she is in their science department, their biology department. She is there as a researcher and as a teacher, okay? Working in the night late, she discovers what she believes to be a cure for a certain strain of cancer. Now, this is what she does. She does research at Stanford. She discovers a cure for a certain strain of cancer. Hurrah! Question: what does she do with this knowledge in terms of sharing it with the larger world? Well, now think about this. She doesn't go on the Oprah show the next day. Because if she were to go on the Oprah show or The View and were to say, hey, last night I discovered a possible cure for cancer, the obvious question would be, tell us about it. And the minute Lockhart starts talking, 99.9% of people watching would not have a clue what she's talking about. How come? Because Lockhart works within a very specific environment in the academic community, okay? She uses language and words that are very specific to her study. And once she started talking about this research, no one would have a clue what she's talking about. A good example of this, my wife's brother, who wrote his PhD in microbiology, when he was writing his dissertation, I took a look at it. The first page had 5 sentences in microbiology. First five sentences, long sentences with lots of words. I didn't have a clue. Why? Very special vocabulary for very special research in the microbiology world. You got me? So what is it Lockhart does to share her newfound possible success, underline the word possible, right? Newfound possible success of a possible cure for a strain of cancer. Ironically, the first thing she'll do is sit down and write an essay. No kidding. That's the first thing she'll do. She doesn't pick up the phone and call somebody. She sits down. The very first thing she does is she writes an essay. Now, this essay she will publish in a very particular journal or periodical. Okay? Journal or periodical. For example, if you go to the University of Wyoming and you walk into their library, you say, take me to the periodical room. They will walk you into a special room. It's huge, huge room, where there are just stacks and stacks and stacks of journals or periodicals. For every single discipline on the university campus, there are specific journals or periodicals. Have you maybe watched the news and you maybe heard the New England Journal of Medicine today reported that blah, 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 blah. The New England Journal of Medicine. What is the New England Journal of Medicine? It's a very particular periodical where Lockhart will publish her findings. Now, why would she do that? Because other researchers, just like Lockhart, will read her essay in the New England Journal of Medicine and try to replicate her findings. They're going to do the same study. Now, if they do the same study and they happen to discover the same findings as Lockhart, all of a sudden Miss Lockhart has become a big shot within that world. she's still not going to get called to the Oprah show. But within the world that she lives in, now, all of a sudden, she kind of becomes a bit of a celebrity. She's going to get flown to, for example, conferences where she will deliver her paper, where she can talk about her findings. Pharmaceutical companies will maybe start and come calling to her. That means money, right? And she has done what she's supposed to do within the field, and that is research. That's her job. But remember, I started by saying Lockhart was a prof at Stanford. And let's imagine for just a moment that she's given a freshman level seminar group, undergraduate group, in biology. So she walks in on the first day of class. She hands out her course outline or her syllabus, just like you received in this class. All university classes require that you have this course outline. It's going to ask of her students that they do what two things would you imagine the most? Well, think about it this way. What is it that Lockhart does in her day most of the time? What are the two things she spends all her time doing? Well, we already said when she discovers new findings, she's doing what? What did we say? Yeah, she's writing, correct? That's one of the things Lockhart does a lot of. But believe it or not, she does something else even more. We're going to call it research, or let's just call it what it is. It's reading, isn't it? For example, Lockhart reads the New England Journal of Medicine, the very periodical she would hope to publish in. She reads that, along with a lot of other periodicals as well. She spends a huge part of her day reading, right? So will it shock you when she walks into her biology class, her seminar to lecture freshmen? Will it shock you that on her course outline, there will be two things she's going to ask those students to do a lot of? What are they? Right? There will be textbooks that will be referenced right away. Guess what? You've got to read those books. We'll talk more about that in a lecture on reading and annotation later. The other thing she'll expect her students to do is, of course, do some writing. Correct? Makes sense? That's what she spends all of her time doing. That's what she will expect her students as well to be doing. Got me? But now wait a minute. We still haven't answered the question we began with. What is the difference between the University of Wyoming and Harvard, and why is it that the U.S. News and World Report usually labels Harvard as one of the top 5 schools in America, but not the University of Wyoming? How come? It doesn't have anything to do with geography. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact that Harvard's in Cambridge and Boston. That's not why the school gets rated in the top 5 by U.S. News and World Report. Well, why does it? The answer is simply this.
They have more money.
I don't understand that, though. Yeah, it costs more to go to Harvard than it does to the University of Wyoming. That's not what I mean by money. What I mean by money is this. Research funds. Now, what does that mean? Well, think about it. When Lockhart, working at Stanford's Medical Center, discovers her possible cure for cancer, one of the things she's going to do is apply for mega amounts of grant money, right, given by institutions like the Ford Foundation and others that give millions and even billions of dollars for research in different fields. The universities that have the props, see, one of the things right away that will happen if she actually discovers a potential cure for a strain of cancer, right away Stanford's going to come to her and offer her 2 or 3 times her salary. Why? Why would they offer her extra money all of a sudden?
So she can do more research?
No, the research funding is going to come from somewhere else. She isn't going to spend her own salary money on her research. Why would they offer her more money to stay at Stanford? Well, who's going to be calling her right away? You got it. The other schools that are listed in the top 10 of U.S. News and World Report. Harvard will definitely give her a call, and the other schools as well. Johns Hopkins and some of the great medical schools will call her and say, I think you should come work for us. We'll pay you a lot more money. Why do they want her working for their institution? She's clearly proved her ability to do good research. That could land her more grant monies. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars that go to these institutions. That's one of the big reasons why a school that finishes in the top tier receives tremendous amounts of research, and they have the profs that are doing that research. Make sense? So the academic community then is driven by what? Well, ultimately, everyone within the academic community that's profiting is involved in some ways in research. That is foundational to what happens at the university, okay? Here's the sad part. Most incoming freshmen don't have a clue that this is the case. Many universities don't even have an attendance policy for classes. So for example, you'll sometimes hear students who just started the university, dude, it's awesome. They don't even make me have to come to class. I'm having an awesome time. They go get blitzed, they go to the football games and jump up and down without their shirts on. Woohoo, this is great. It never occurs to them that if I'm a prof of 35 students, that's 35 papers I'm going to have to read. While I'm reading student papers, guess what I'm not doing? Right? I'm not researching if I'm reading student papers. A number of years ago, people started to point out the interesting fact that oftentimes teachers that are voted Teacher of the Year are gone within 5 years of receiving the award. They're fired from that university. They're considered some of the best teachers, but then they're often released from employment by the school. Why? The school isn't there, first and foremost, for teaching. The school is there for, that's what they're there for. So when you arrive at the university, you're being propped by people who are doing research, if you're a TA, right? You're being propped, if you're being propped by a full tenure prof, who is also involved, just like Lockhart, involved in science. I like to think about the academic community as kind of an upside-down pyramid then. It kind of works like this, where this fall, more students will begin in universities and colleges in America than in the history of America. More students will start university college classes. So they all come in right away. 99% of those freshmen do not have a clue why they're there, other than that's what they're supposed to do. Dude, I'm supposed to go to college. That's what they told me I'm supposed to do. Right? They do not have an idea at all of what the dynamic is in play there for students. Right? And that's unfortunate. And I always feel kind of sad when I see those students who are in the football stadiums jumping up and down blitz. They have no clue, many of them, why they're even there and what the dynamics are on the ground, okay? Of course, many students will drop out, right? Notice how it's narrowing, right? A few students will end up staying for graduate school. Ultimately, a few even more will stay for that PhD. Here's the thing for Lockhart. When she enters at Stanford, when she enters that classroom to start teaching those students, the reality is she's only really looking for a certain kind of student who might ultimately become a PhD candidate. That's what she's looking for in a student. Got me? Well, now let's finish our conversation. If this is the case, if this is what the academic community is, an institution that is driven by research grant money, and that's why everyone's involved, then what are the skill sets that an incoming freshman would want to make sure that she or he has? What would they be? What are the things you better be able to do pretty well if you're going to survive this experience? And no, drinking beer ain't it, is it?
Reading.
That's it, huh? The two skill sets that Lockhart in her biology class at Stanford is going to assume students already know how to do. Already know how to do. That's the assumption. So when she starts handing out 50, 60, 70 pages a night of reading from that biology text, that is a minuscule amount of reading compared to what she's doing. Right? She'll knock down 50 pages from the New England Journal of Medicine in an hour as she's reading. So for her to give that amount of reading to her freshmen, for her it doesn't seem like that big of a deal at all. Of course, a whole lot of incoming freshmen are pretty stunned at the amount of reading they got to do. Dude, are you kidding me? And you're giving me all this reading and there are no cliff notes or spark notes for most of this crap. Right, that's right, that's right. You're going to actually have to read the biology text. You're actually going to have to read the history text, right? Of course, that's not the only skill set